I married Weston Calloway 6 months ago to save my failing theater. Layer 1, I'm the anonymous playwright his family has spent 3 years trying to unmask. Layer 2, I sit on the heritage board that can freeze his family's permits. Layer 3, I'm the actual heir to the theater chain his family spent 2 years trying to acquire. Surprise, Weston. That part I haven't said out loud, not yet. Right now, 6 months into this marriage, I let him believe exactly what the wedding announcement said. Mrs. Josie Calloway, the girl who runs the tired old theater on Meeting Street that his family's money rescued out of the kindness of their checkbook. He believes it because I built that story, brick by brick, for 6 years before he ever walked through the Aldridge's front doors. The Aldridge Theater sits on Meeting Street with 812 red velvet seats, a ceiling painted with cherubs nobody's touched up since 1974, and a chandelier that drops actual dust on opening night like it's part of the show. My grandfather built it in 1926. He built 4 more after that, up and down the coast, and called the whole thing Delacroix Theaters, and by the time I was born there wasn't a marquee between Charleston and Richmond that didn't have our name bolted to it somewhere. Charleston keeps its ghosts polished. Tourists pay actual money to be led past our lobby after dark specifically because of the rumors, and I have never once corrected a single tour guide's facts, because half what they get wrong is somehow closer to true than what actually happened. There's a light that burns in every one of those theaters, all night, every night, even when the building's dark. Theater people call it a ghost light. Ours has a second rule nobody outside the family knows. Before opening night, you write one word in chalk on the underside of the stage apron, where no audience will ever see it, and you never tell anyone what the word was. My grandfather taught me that the summer I turned 8, a year after my parents' car went off a wet bridge outside Beaufort and didn't come back up in time to matter. He crouched under that stage with a piece of chalk in his big hand and told me the house remembers everyone who stays with it, Josie Bird, even when nobody else does. I've been writing a word alone under that stage for 6 years now. Growing up, a Delacroix meant ribbon cuttings before I could tie my own shoes. It meant my grandfather's hand on my shoulder in front of cameras, strangers calling me the littlest Delacroix like I was mascot and hair in the same small body. I loved him with any complications at all. I hated the spotlight he kept putting me in front of, the way people's whole faces changed the second they heard the last name, doing math about what I was worth before they'd bothered asking what I liked for breakfast. I remember being 9 years old at a grand reopening in Savannah, in a dress that itched, holding a pair of golden scissors too big for my hands, while a reporter asked my grandfather if I was being groomed for the company, like I was a horse. I remember my grandfather laughing warmly, correctly, and answering for me before I'd even decided how the question made me feel. When he died, I was 19. My cousin Marcus spent 4 months in probate court trying to prove I wasn't really a Delacroix at all, some ugly half-invented story about my mother, before a judge threw it out in an afternoon that felt to me like it had taken 4 years instead. I won. I did not feel like I'd won anything. I took my mother's maiden name, Vance, packed one bag, and asked Preston Ames, the only lawyer who'd known me since I was in diapers and still sends a birthday card every March without fail, to let me disappear into the smallest, least profitable theater in the whole company. Run it into the ground or back to life entirely on my own. Nobody watching, nobody doing math on my last name ever again. I picked the Aldridge. It felt at the time like picking myself. 6 years of that. 6 years of patch seats and grant applications and a staff of 11 before I paid myself, and I was doing fine. Right up until a firm I'd never heard of, Palmetto Bridge Capital, called in our renovation loan 9 days early. No warning. No room to negotiate, payment due in full, or the bank would own the building by Halloween. Ruth Odom has run the box office since before I was born, older than my grandfather's second theater, and she still calls me Miss Josephine when she thinks I need reminding of something, and Josie the rest of the time. She is the only person on this earth who never once, not for a single day, cared what my last name was. My stage manager, a patient, unshakable man named Felix, has reset the same worn floor marks every single week for 6 years, 'cause a new template costs $400 we never had. These are the people I was actually protecting every time I said no to an easier answer. Not a building, them. I didn't know yet that Palmetto Bridge Capital had exactly one client in the entire world. Weston Calloway walked into my office on day 4 of those 9 days, wearing a suit that cost more than my monthly payroll, sent by his mother's company to, in his own words, see what we're actually saving before we write the check. I expected a shark. I got a man who spent 40 minutes reading the framed programs on my office wall instead of my financials. A man who asked what a ghost light was and didn't laugh when I told him, and looked up at that water-stained cherub ceiling like it was the Sistine Chapel and said, quietly, "This place is worth more broke than most buildings are worth full." 3 days later, with the bank's clock still running, he came back alone and put a different kind of offer on the table. "Marry me," he said. "Not because my family needs a tax write-off, because the fastest legal path to my mother's board approving emergency funding without 6 months of committee review is a spousal trustee designation. And because I've been finding reasons not to leave your lobby every day this week, and if you're going to lose this place anyway, I'd rather lose it having actually tried." It was the strangest proposal I have ever heard, and also the most honest sentence anyone had said to me in 6 years. I said yes for the theater. I am no longer entirely sure that was the only reason I said it. I noticed one small thing that day and let it go, the way you let a splinter go because pulling it out looks like more trouble than leaving it in. Celeste Calloway's face, the first time Weston said my name to her, did something small and pleased that I told myself at the time was just good manners. I have had a great deal of time since then to reconsider that. Harper Calloway found me before her mother ever thought to use her. 3 weeks into the marriage, she showed up at the Aldridge unannounced with 2 coffees and 0 agenda I could ever find, sat through an entire technical rehearsal in the back row, and told me afterward that she'd always wanted a sister who wasn't constantly comparing report cards. I liked her immediately and completely, the uncomplicated way you like someone before you have any reason not to. I did not yet know there was a reason coming. 6 months in, most of our nights are ordinary in the specific, good way I never once got of growing up. Last week Weston climbed a ladder in a $200 shirt to help me restring the marquee's dead bulbs, cursed at every third one, and refused to come down until every last bulb was lit. "That light stays on as long as you're standing under it," he announced from the top of the ladder, like it was a legal document he was fully prepared to defend in court. "I don't care what my mother's contractors think it's worth per square foot." I didn't tell him that night that the light I actually meant wasn't the one on the marquee. I just handed him another bulb and let him think we were only talking about the sign. Sunday dinner at the Calloway house is its own kind of theater, all crystal and performed warmth. 2 weeks ago Celeste sat at the head of the table, cut her chicken into small, unhurried pieces and told me, without once looking up, that I was a lovely placeholder. "Try not to get too attached to the chandeliers, Josie," she said. "Fixtures like that rarely survive a redesign." Weston's jaw went tight. He didn't correct her. I smiled and asked for the rolls, because I have spent 6 years learning that the fastest way to lose a room is to let it see you flinch. Later on the porch I heard her on the phone with someone about paperwork. "Trustee Claus," she said, twice, the second time sharper, like whoever was on the other end had asked a question she didn't love answering. I didn't know yet what that phrase had to do with me specifically. I filed it away the way you file away a splinter you'll deal with later. Later that same week, I went looking for a stapler in Weston's home office and found blueprints instead, rolled up under a stack of catalogs like something meant to stay hidden a little longer than it did. Not renovation, demolition. The Aldridge's entire backstage wing, the one with my grandfather's dressing room still labeled in his own handwriting on the door, gone, replaced on the drafting paper with 42 boutique hotel suites and a rooftop bar with a name some branding firm had clearly been paid a great deal of money to invent. I sat on the floor of my husband's office and read Calloway Hospitality's letterhead at the top of the page 3 separate times, like it might change if I only gave it enough chances. I didn't scream. 6 years of managing a building on no money teaches you that screaming doesn't fix budgets, and it turns out it doesn't fix marriages either. I put the blueprints on the kitchen counter that night and asked Weston exactly one question. "Did you know?" He went pale in a way I don't think he knew how to fake. "My mother's team handles renovation scoping," he said. "I've seen concept boards. I have never once seen this." I believed him. I still believe him, which either makes me generous or makes me a fool, and some weeks I genuinely cannot tell you which one it is. What I told him next, I hadn't told a living soul in 3 years. I sat down across from him at that same counter and said, "That theater isn't just a building I manage, Weston. Look up Calder Vance. Look up who's been quietly winning playwriting prizes nobody can ever get to a podium to accept, and then look at the manuscripts locked in the bottom drawer of my desk at the Aldridge. and you will understand exactly why I will burn your family's entire company to the ground before I let anyone touch that stage." He looked up Calder Vance on his phone right there at the counter. 3 Ashworth Prizes for New American Drama, 0 public appearances, 0 photographs ever of anyone. He looked at me for a long time after that. "I always wondered if you had somewhere else you went, in your head when things got hard here," he finally said. "I just didn't know it had a name that good." I have never loved him more than I did in that specific, unglamorous, blueprint-ruined moment. The trouble with using a secret well once is that you'll want to use it again before you're ready. 2 nights later, we sat on the floor of the Aldridge's dark house with a single work light burning, and I let him read 40 pages of the play I hadn't shown anyone, not my agent, not the 2 theaters currently pretending they weren't bidding against each other for the world premiere. He read slowly. He laughed once in exactly the place I'd hoped somebody would, and when he finished, he didn't say it was good, which every producer I'd ever worked with anonymously always said first, cheap and fast like a reflex. He said, "The mother in Act 2 isn't your mother, she's you. You're writing the part of yourself you're scared of becoming, aren't you?" Nobody had ever gotten that close, that fast, without me handing them the map first. "Careful," I told him, my voice not entirely steady. "That's the kind of thing that makes a person hard to leave." "Good," he said, "I wasn't planning on it." That manuscript is called The Understudy's House, and it is, in the specific coded way only I will ever fully understand, about a woman who spends a decade playing a smaller version of herself, so thoroughly that she nearly forgets the bigger one is still in there, waiting in the wings, memorizing every line anyway. I had been writing toward my own ending for 3 years without letting myself notice. It took Weston 40 pages and 1 quiet sentence to notice it for me. Callaway Hospitality threw a donor preview 10 days before the Aldridge's 100th anniversary gala, technically to celebrate our new partnership, a phrase that was news to me in that specific wording. Their hired creative consultant, a slick, unbothered man named Dominic Reyes, stood in my own lobby and informed a small circle of donors that the current programming was, and I am quoting him exactly, cute community theater stuff, before real curation takes over. Weston's hand found the small of my back before I'd even finished deciding how angry to let myself be. "She is," he said, pleasantly, to the whole circle, "the reason 3 of the last 5 Ashworth Prize winners for New American Drama premiered on this stage under a pen name half of you have spent 2 years trying to unmask at your book clubs. Ask her about Calder Vance sometime." Carefully. Dominic's smile did something complicated and then simply stopped existing. It wasn't a full reveal. It wasn't public, not really, just 4 donors and 1 very quiet consultant. But it was the first crack in the family's confidence, and I felt it, small and sharp and deeply satisfying, right under my ribs. 10 days, Celeste said to me on her way out, not quite meeting my eyes. "Do try to have the lobby carpet dealt with before the gala." 6 days later, I walked into the Aldridge at 8 in the morning to find a survey crew already working in my backstage wing, clipboards, tape measures. A supervisor who informed me, without looking up from his clipboard, that Callaway Hospitality had authorized a pre-demolition structural assessment ahead of Saturday's announcement. Nobody had called me, nobody had asked me anything at all. They were measuring my grandfather's dressing room like it was already a hotel bathroom with better lighting. I told the supervisor to stop. He glanced at my cardigan, at my empty hands, and told me, not unkindly, that he took his authorization from a signed contract, not from whoever happened to be standing in the hallway looking upset about it. So I stopped being whoever happened to be standing in the hallway. I drove 11 minutes to my car and 11 minutes back with my badge clipped to my collar, and called Marguerite Simmons, chair of the Lowcountry Heritage Preservation Trust, from the front steps of my own theater, while the crew kept measuring like I was a mild inconvenience they'd already been warned might happen. Margaret had put me on that board 3 years earlier, half as a joke, after she watched me change a dead marquee bulb myself at midnight rather than wait on a contractor. "Anybody who does that at midnight for free has the right instincts," she'd told me. I never forgot it. By 4 that afternoon, the trust had issued an emergency historic review hold on any invasive assessment of the Aldridge's original 1926 structure, citing a formal request from a sitting board member. My formal request. My board seat, the one Weston had always filed generously under Historic Society stuff, some board she's on, without ever asking a single follow-up question. The survey crew packed up their tape measures at 4:40, visibly irritated, like the building had personally inconvenienced them. A small item ran in the next morning's Post and Courier. Historic Preservation Hold halts hotel developers Aldridge assessment. No names attached to my side of it yet, just enough. Weston found me still sitting on the Aldridge's steps at 6 that evening, preservation paperwork in my lap, utterly wrung out and grinning like an idiot. He didn't say anything about the news yet. He just held out his hand, pulled me up and walked me into the empty lobby, where he'd apparently spent 20 minutes finding an old jazz station on the house radio system nobody had used since the Reagan administration. We danced badly in work clothes under a chandelier that badly needed rewiring for exactly one song. He is a terrible dancer, I told him so. He said his mother had spent $11,000 on cotillion lessons that clearly hadn't taken, and for one entire song for the first time in 6 days, neither one of us thought about his mother again at all. I went to bed that night thinking I had won something. I had no idea yet how small a thing I had actually won. Celeste called me herself that night, no assistant, no pleasantries. You think a preservation seat is the whole game, she said. Sweetheart, my son didn't marry a theater manager. He married the last unclaimed Delacroix trustee seat, whether either of you understood that 6 months ago or not. The Aldridge was never the acquisition. The Aldridge was the door. Don't flatter yourself into thinking any part of this was ever about you. You were paperwork with good bone structure. I stood in my own kitchen holding a phone that had gone very heavy in my hand, and finally understood, all the way down, what I had actually married into. Not one theater. 5. Every stage my grandfather ever built and every seat in every one of them, and a company I had spent 6 years pretending I had absolutely nothing to do with. I didn't sleep that night. I did something instead I hadn't done in 3 years. I started pulling threads, one at a time, the way you clear a stage after closing night, checking under every seat for what got left behind. Here is what I didn't know the night that loan got called in, and only pieced together afterward, in fragments, the way you rebuild a car crash from skid marks and a stopped clock. I'll tell it the way it actually happened, not the way I first assumed it had. 6 weeks before Weston ever walked into my office, Celeste Calloway sat alone in her study with a manila folder her outside counsel had spent 3 months quietly assembling, and read, for the second time, a probate filing from a case that had technically closed 19 years earlier. Delacroix versus Delacroix, a cousin's failed challenge. A judge's ruling that had named, in one clean paragraph nobody had thought to redact, the sole surviving trustee eligible here of Delacroix Theaters. Josephine Vance, she said out loud, to no one, testing the name like a key in a lock she'd been waiting years to find. Formerly Delacroix. She picked up her phone and dialed a small lending firm she kept on retainer for exactly this kind of leverage. Call in the Aldridge note, she said. 9 days, no extensions, no exceptions, and no explanation if anyone asks why. She never told her son why. She told him there was a struggling theater on Meeting Street that deserved his personal attention, and let the rest happen the way she had learned, across 30 years of building an empire out of other people's emergencies, that the rest of it always happened, if you were patient and you picked the right 9 days. I know all of that now. I didn't know a single piece of it the week the loan got called in. I thought I had gotten unlucky. I thought Weston had gotten lucky, finding me in the wreckage of it. We had both been found, just not by luck. Harper Calloway is the only person in that family who ever hugged me like she meant it before she wanted anything from me at all. She showed up at the Aldridge 2 nights after Celeste's phone call, sat on the edge of the stage with her shoes kicked off, and told me, before I could say a single word, that her mother had asked her back in February to have coffee with me. Be your friend, Harper said, her voice cracking somewhere in the middle of it. Tell her what you say. I didn't think it mattered, Josie. I swear to God I didn't think any of it mattered. It mattered. I could have been angry. Sitting there, I found I mostly wasn't. Harper had spent her entire life being the second Calloway child, the one Celeste sent to run the small, unglamorous errands while Weston got the assignments that counted, and I recognized that particular flavor of being useful instead of loved a little too well to waste it being furious at her for it. I'm not going to keep doing it, Harper said. Whatever you're about to do, I want to actually be on a side this time. A real one. We split a bag of gas station licorice on that stage until almost midnight, laughing about nothing in particular, the first easy hour either of us had had in weeks. Sometimes the quietest scenes in a story end up being the ones that hold the whole thing together later. Dominic Reyes tried one more move before he ran out of moves entirely. Harper caught wind of it 2 days later. A background call to a features reporter at the Charleston paper, planting the suggestion that the mysterious Calder-Vance rumor was, in Dominic's careful phrasing, an unverifiable claim being used to inflate a small theater's leverage in an ordinary real estate negotiation. I called that reporter myself before Dominic's call had even finished cooling on the line. I confirmed nothing. I simply asked her, politely, whether the Ashworth Prize Committee might be willing to comment on record about the identity verification process behind their last 3 awards, given that someone appeared to be casting doubt on it. She never printed a word about it, not yet. But 3 days later, the Ashworth Prize's executive director posted one unrelated-looking line on the organization's own account, congratulating an anonymous past winner on a personal milestone, and tagged nothing and no one at all. Dominic never brought it up again. Neither did I. Some fights you win entirely by making sure the other side understands you could finish them at any moment and choosing once not to yet. I told Weston everything 2 nights after that. All of it. The trustee clause I still didn't fully understand yet. His mother's exact words on the phone. The particular shape of my fear, which had nothing to do with hotels or blueprints and everything to do with him. If I do this, I said, really do it, all the way. There's a version where you have to choose between your mother and me in front of every reporter in Charleston. I need to know you understand that before I let this go any further. He was quiet long enough that my stomach dropped straight through the floor. I've been choosing since the day I found those blueprints, he finally said. I just hadn't said it out loud yet, because I was hoping I wouldn't have to make you watch me do it in public. If it ever comes down to a choice between my mother's version of this family and you, Josie, it isn't a choice. It never was. It just took me 30 years to find someone worth finally saying that sentence to. My father built half of what she runs now, and then died before he ever got to see what she'd do with the rest of it, he said quieter. I've spent 10 years terrified of disappointing the only parent I had left. It turns out I was so busy being terrified of that, I almost missed the chance to be something better instead. I don't want to be almost anymore, Josie. Not about this. Not about you. I believed him completely, I still do. The breaking point came 3 days before the gala, at a Preservation Trust fundraiser I had personally helped organize for 11 months, long before any of this began. I'd stepped to the coat check hallway to take a call when I heard Celeste's voice around the corner, low and pleased, talking to Dominic Reyes about final gala logistics. And then, almost like an aside, almost like nothing at all. She was always going to remember she was a Delacroix eventually, Celeste said. I only needed her married before she did. I stood very still in that hallway with somebody's cashmere coat still folded over my arm. 3 days, Dominic said. Everything on schedule? Everything, Celeste said, is exactly where I put it. I didn't confront her in that hallway. I have spent 6 years being calm about things that deserve screaming, and that particular skill, it turns out, is the only inheritance nobody can ever take back off you once you've earned it honestly, on your own, one bad year at a time. I hung the coat back up. I walked back into that fundraiser and smiled at every single person who complimented the flowers. And somewhere between the coat check and the dessert table, I stopped being a woman waiting to find out what would happen to her theater, and became a woman who had already decided what was about to happen to everyone else's plans instead. I didn't call Weston that night, I called Preston Ames. Josephine, he said, the way he said my name since I was 7 years old, like it still faintly surprises him every single time I actually answer. I wondered when you'd call. I asked him one question, am I still eligible? There was a pause I felt more than heard. Your grandfather wrote a clause into that trust the year you turned 16, he said. Continuous, demonstrated stewardship of any single Delacroix property, under any name, for no less than 5 years, restores full trustee standing automatically. No petition required, no family vote required. He made me swear I would never tell you what it said, Josephine. He wanted you to come back because you wanted to, not because a lawyer handed you the instructions. 6 years, I said. I've run the Aldridge for 6 years. I know, Preston said, and for the first time in 19 years of knowing him, I heard something crack straight through his careful lawyer's voice that sounded almost like pride. I've known for one. Don't go anywhere, he'd told me at my grandfather's funeral. Stay close to the building, he'd said again at my wedding, and once more at a birthday lunch I'd nearly forgotten entirely. I had thought both times that he meant it sentimentally. He had meant it like a countdown only he could hear. I thought about my grandfather's chalk, and his big hand around mine under that stage, and the house remembers everyone who stays with it, And for the first time in 6 years, I let myself actually believe that sentence was about to matter more than it ever had. I met Harper at a coffee shop 2 blocks from her mother's office, chosen specifically because Celeste has never once in her life set foot anywhere without valet parking. Harper slid a manila envelope across the table like we were both in a spy movie neither of us had auditioned for. Inside it were 6 months of emails between her mother and outside counsel, plus one recorded voicemail Harper said she'd kept on her phone for months without ever quite admitting to herself why. "Play it," I said. Celeste's voice, tinny and small through Harper's phone speaker, was giving a lending officer very specific instructions about a note on a property called the Aldridge, using my legal name, the one I hadn't spoken out loud myself in 6 years. The timestamp on the file placed the entire call 9 full days before Palmetto Bridge Capital ever called that loan in. Harper didn't say "I told you so." She just closed the envelope again and said, quietly, "Do what you need to do, I'll be fine." I called Marguerite Simmons that same afternoon and asked her to be ready to move on landmark status the instant I gave her the word. No delays, no committee review, nothing left to chance. And then I did the one thing that frightened me more than any of it. I stopped protecting Celeste's plan. For 4 months, quietly, without ever once being asked to, I had been the one smoothing over local preservationist concerns, calming down 2 different reporters, keeping the community's growing suspicion of the new partnership from boiling over before the Callaways were ready to spin it their own way. I stopped smoothing anything at all. I let the questions grow exactly as big as they wanted to grow. I let Saturday come. The morning of the gala, I drove out past the bridge outside Beaufort my parents never made it back across, and I sat there for a while with the windows down, and I told my grandfather, out loud, in an empty car, that I was about to do something he mightn't have approved the timing of, though I suspected he would have loved the theatrics of it entirely. I decided, sitting there, exactly what word I was going to write in chalk that night. It was the first time in 6 years the word had come to me before I'd even reached the building. Friday night, the evening before the gala, my phone rang with an emergency trustee call nobody had told me was happening until 9 minutes before it started. Celeste's outside counsel, a clipped voice I'd never once heard before, informed the call that 19 years of operating under an assumed name constituted formal abandonment of trustee standing under standard trust language, and moved for an emergency ratification vote on the full Delacroix Theatre's acquisition, effective immediately, before any competing claim could be formally filed by anyone. Preston tried to speak. The counsel talked directly over him. Somebody muted his line entirely for what felt, on my end of the phone, like 4 of the longest minutes of my entire life. For 4 minutes, listening to dead air where my own lawyer's voice should have been, I let myself believe I had lost. Not the theater, all of it. Every stage my grandfather ever built, signed away by a technicality nobody had bothered to check against the one clause that actually mattered. I sat on my kitchen floor, phone pressed so hard against my ear it left a mark, and listened to a stranger describe my last 6 years as an act of abandonment, not stewardship, abandonment. As though every patch seat and grant application and midnight bulb change had been a woman running away, instead of a woman staying exactly where she'd chosen to stay, on her own terms, for the first time in her entire life. Someone on that call I never found out who actually used the word squatter. Then Preston's line came back and he was not quiet anymore. The Aldridge's 100th anniversary gala was, on paper, Callaway Hospitality's night. 812 seats sold out, press credentials stacked at the door. A banner already printed and hung above a stage my grandfather built with his own 2 hands, reading a historic partnership, for the next 100 years in letters 4 feet tall. Celeste took that stage at 9 o'clock and addressed the exact color of money, and began gracefully, warmly, to announce the acquisition to a packed house that had no idea it was about to become the most talked about audience in the city's history. She got through 1 full sentence before Preston Ames walked down the center aisle carrying a folder I recognized, from 30 feet away, as older than I was. "Point of order," he said in a voice that filled that entire theater without a single microphone, the exact way I imagine my grandfather's voice used to. "I'd like to read 1 clause from the original 1926 Delacroix Theatre's trust into the public record, before this vote goes any further." He read it. All of it slowly, so no one in that room could later claim they'd missed a word. Continuous, demonstrated stewardship, restored automatically, no petition required. Celeste did not yield the stage quietly. That is not a thing Celeste Callaway has ever done in her life. She turned on Preston with a smile still nailed carefully in place and told the room warmly that sentiment was a lovely thing but hardly a legal standard, and that outside counsel had already reviewed the abandonment question thoroughly the night before. Preston did not raise his voice. He never has in 19 years needed to. He is welcome to review it again, he said, once he's finished reading the part where a Delacroix trustee's own written instrument, filed and notarized in 1926, explicitly overrides any standard trust boilerplate his firm's associate copied and pasted at midnight on a Friday. Somewhere behind me I heard Marguerite Simmons laugh once, sharp and delighted, and not quietly enough to pretend she hadn't. 6 years of my name on a lease that reads Vance, I told 812 seats. Walking up the side aisle in the dress I had bought for someone else's celebration is 6 years of continuous stewardship under a founder's own clause. I am not contesting my trustee standing tonight. I am confirming it. Somewhere in the fourth row, Dominic Reyes put his head in both hands. A reporter near the aisle was already typing so fast I could hear his keys from the stage steps. I climbed onto my own stage and gave that room 3 layers, in order, exactly the way I had learned, the hard way, that timing is the only mercy worth ever offering an audience. Layer 1, I said. I am Calder Vance. 200 journalists who had spent 3 years chasing that name simultaneously reached for their phones, and the sound of it, all at once, was almost funny. Layer 2. As of 4 o'clock this afternoon, the Lowcountry Heritage Preservation Trust has filed for permanent landmark protection on this building's original 1926 structure. Not a hold. Nobody redevelops a landmark, Mrs. Calloway. Not you, not the next buyer. Not anyone ever again for as long as this city stands. Layer 3. My voice did not shake, though I had genuinely expected it to. My name is Josephine Delacroix. I am the sole surviving trustee of Delacroix Theatres, effective tonight, under a clause my own grandfather wrote with his own hand. And as that trustee, I am formally rejecting Calloway Hospitality's acquisition, in full right now, in front of every single person who came here tonight to watch you announce the opposite. For 1 full second, the entire house went completely silent, the specific silence that only 800 live bodies holding their breath at once can make, before it broke into something between applause and pure pandemonium. Somewhere in the mezzanine I heard Ruth Odom, who has worked the Aldrich box office for 41 years and never once raised her voice above a pleasant murmur in all that time, let out a whoop so loud 3 separate news cameras swung toward her instead of me. I have never loved a sound more in my entire life. The banner over the stage still read a historic partnership for the next 100 years. Nobody took it down before the photographs ran the next morning on 3 different front pages. Within a month, Calloway Hospitality's own board, older than Celeste's chairmanship and considerably less interested than she had assumed in explaining away a shell lending company called Palmetto Bridge Capital to state regulators, opened an independent investigation into the Aldridge loan's early call-in and asked her to step down as chair while it proceeded. The city's building department issued its own citation, smaller but not nothing, for an unauthorized structural assessment conducted 6 days before any landmark filing had existed to prevent it. Weston didn't say very much on that stage. He didn't need to. He crossed those boards in front of 812 seats, in front of his own mother, and took my hand like it was the only decision he had made all year that he was completely, permanently certain of. You used a marriage as leverage, he told her, quiet enough that only the front rows caught it, and loud enough that they'd repeated it to everyone else by breakfast. I used the same marriage to fall in love with someone who was never actually going to need saving in the first place. I know exactly which one of us sleeps fine tonight. Celeste left the Aldridge that night through the side exit, alone, no assistant, no comment for the 3 reporters who followed her as far as the parking lot anyway. Harper found me in the wings afterward, mascara gone, and hugged me hard enough to leave a mark. I have never once in my life been prouder to share a last name with somebody who isn't even really keeping it, she said, into my shoulder. Weston didn't say much that first hour. He mostly just stood close, one hand at the small of my back through an endless receiving line of stunned donors and delighted board members, and at least one reporter who tried twice to get a comment out of him and got nothing but a smile both times. It wasn't until nearly midnight, once the caterers had finally packed up the last of the shrimp and grits and the house lights had come halfway down, that he pulled me into the empty box office and just held on for a while, saying nothing at all, like the silence itself was the only vow either of us had energy left to make that night. 3 weeks later, on an ordinary Tuesday nobody had sold a single ticket to, I stood backstage at the Aldridge at 11 at night while the ghost light burned its steady, unremarkable circle across an empty stage. Weston sat on an overturned road case eating cold pad thai straight out of the container, watching me write one word in chalk on the underside of the stage apron, the way I have every year since I was 8 years old. Except this year, for the first time, I said the word out loud before I wrote it, because I finally had someone worth saying it to. Home, I told. He didn't ask what it meant, he just reached over in the dark and found my hand, the way he has now for exactly the number of nights it takes a person to finally stop counting them. Harper had stopped by earlier that same evening with a bag of that same gas station licorice. Already halfway through law school applications, she says she's filing under her own name only, and no one else's, thank you very much. Ruth left a note taped to my dressing room mirror that just says in her small, precise handwriting, told you the instincts were right, with 3 exclamation points she has never once used on anything else in 41 years. The house remembers everyone who stays with it. My grandfather taught me that under this exact stage 20 years ago, and for a very long time I thought he only meant the theater. I don't think that anymore. I did not have to disappear to be safe here, I only ever had to stay long enough for someone to notice I already was. Did she go far enough, or was she still too merciful? Comment justice if the ending was perfect. Comment harder if you wanted an even colder revenge. Your comments decide how ruthless the next ending should be. Like and subscribe if you want to be here for the next story.